Namostu Mavid Vishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from Religion and Its Practice. We're on the last lecture by Swami Turiyananda called Paths of Realizations. We're just going to go back to the beginning of the paragraph that we're on, which is about the just 2 paragraphs from the end, but they're both very long paragraphs, so about 3 pages. So, Paths to Realizations. So, let us continue with that.
If one can depend on him absolutely, one gets this help. He himself sets everything right. But is this also easy? Is any and everyone able to do this? Not so. Even this is possible only if there is the grace of the Lord, or if one is so fortunate as to get the company of some great soul. Otherwise, not. Mere talk will not do. One has to learn how to examine the contents of one's mind. These one has to purify and offer to the Lord. Is this so easy? If even after a lifelong struggle one gets this attitude, one becomes blessed. On the whole, it's not a joke. Be it dualism or monism, to get truly established in any of one of these is very difficult. The author of Bodhisattva, talking of the difference between Dvaita and Advaita, says, some worship him saying, I am thine, but others again, as I am thyself. Though there is a slight difference between the two, yet the result of both is the same. The dualist says, I am thine, and the Advaita says, I am thee. Yet the result is the same in both cases, namely the destruction of ignorance and misery. There's no difference as regards that. Whatever view appeals to one, one is at liberty to accept. But then that attitude should be pure. If my attitude is monistic, then I have to deny the body, mind, intellect. The moment I say, I am the Atman, happiness and misery will have to vanish. And I must realize that I am partless, actionless, calm, faultless, and taintless. If I regard myself as his child or his servant, then I must be contented with what he does with me, or wherever he may place me, and must surrender myself to him with the absolute faith that it is all for my own good. Both attitudes are difficult. Both have to be practiced for long. But the result of both is the same. The destruction of samsara and the attainment of bliss. Let one select whichever ideal one likes, but one must put it into practice without sincerity, without any inconsistency between thought and life. Without that, neither path will lead to the goal.
Right. So, of course, it's often said that keep the Advaita as that background philosophy in the hem of your garment or your hip pocket, or however you want to put it, for whatever culture and clothes you're wearing. But in practice, we're pretty much going to all be dualists, because getting rid of that body-mind ego complex is very difficult. We're all living in the world, and we're all still dependent on eating. We have to interact with other people, and so to maintain that attitude of pure Advaitism is extremely difficult. It's much easier, even though he says it too is difficult, it's much easier to follow the path of dualism and to keep that attitude of that you're worshiping a particular aspect and form of God with the attitude of a child or of a servant or of a best friend, or whichever attitude you like to maintain. That's much easier when we're still burdened with the concept that we're trapped here in a body and a mind. All right, let's read the last paragraph.
The Lord, while instructing Uddhava in yoga, has clearly described the qualifications of the aspirants of the different yoga paths. With a view to effecting liberation of man, I have inculcated 3 yogas or methods, namely those of knowledge, work, and devotion. There's no other means anywhere. Of these, the path of knowledge is for those who've got disgusted with work and have renounced it. For those who have not become disgusted with it and desire its fruits, there is the path of work. But the path of devotion is for the man who somehow has got a veneration for talks about me and such other things, and who is neither disgusted with nor grossly attached to work. If one reflects on these passages, one will be able to find out easily for which yoga one is fit. Very few indeed are those who've been able to give up sense objects completely. Therefore, the number of those fit for the path of knowledge is small. Those who are very much attached to sense objects cannot but work. But those who are midway, those who have not been able to give up completely sense objects, but at the same time are not too much attached to them and have faith in the Lord and devotion to Him, if such practice the path of bhakti, there's a great chance of knowledge being attained soon. This path of bhakti is very easy and yields results soon. It begins with dualism, and in time, and through the grace of the Lord, perfection is attained in it. It ends in Advaita of itself. Devotion is the best means. There's no doubt about this. If we have love for Him, then love for everything else will come of itself. If one gets devotion to Him, is anything left unattained? Therefore, our duty is to get love for Him.
Interesting. He doesn't mention Raja Yoga here, which is what we often refer to as the 4th yoga. But of course, again, Raja Yoga can be blended with any of these others. It basically has to do with focusing the mind. So the pure Advaitist Jnani would be focusing the mind on maybe one of the Mahavakyas, I am that, or I am Brahman, or all is consciousness, or something of that nature. And it's practicing the one-pointedness of mind. Now, that is probably possible during a meditation period, but to continue that all day, 24 hours a day, every day, that's much more difficult. And of course, if you haven't given up work, then what are you going to do? You have to follow the path of karma yoga while you're working. And so you can either take the path of karma yoga without an aspect of God to think of it, and just, again, think of it as a time when you're practicing concentration. You're going to concentrate your mind on the work, but you're going to be detached from the results. So that's one way to do it. Another way, or another aspect of karma yoga, is to do it as service, thinking that you are one with everyone. Everyone is one because there is no separation. Everything is infinite, the infinite, undivided, unchanging reality. And so you are that, and so is everybody else. The other way is to think that the Lord is manifest in every being, and so you are serving the Lord. So you do it with a devotional attitude. And then, of course, there's bhakti yoga by itself, where you're doing your meditation focusing on a particular aspect of God, and you're going to be meditating on that aspect and cultivating a feeling of love and devotion for that aspect. So really, in this day and age, considering how complicated life is and how many things we have to do, the combination of these yogas is really the best and the safest way of doing it. And it always includes some element of bhakti yoga. So that's really the kind of the recommendation that our great illuminary souls, Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, down the line of the direct disciples, have recommended, because it's really the easiest path to follow. It's interesting that first paragraph, Holy Mother, we had somebody read a passage from the works of Holy Mother, and she said virtually the same thing with regards to worshiping the mother aspect as well as the masculine aspect. So it doesn't really matter which one you're seeing, but the results are the same. All right, so let's see. Atma suggested that we read from a book something about, what was it, the Tales of a Pair of Bulls or something like that, wasn't it? Tales and Parables, sorry. So Tales and Parables. All right, so we're going to read some of these Tales and Parables. These were apparently taught by Sri Ramakrishna. Many of them you'll find in the Gospel, but a few of them you won't. So these were collected, of course, from all the people that used to visit Sri Ramakrishna. And the Gospel, of course, is just what M recorded, and M wasn't there all the time. So you find a few parables that are not in the Gospel. We won't read all of them. Some of them are more interesting than others, but we're going to begin with the first two, and they're kind of broken up into sections here. And the first section is called The World, and we'll read the first two parables. One, this is indeed the world, and the second one is in this forest of the world. All right.
All right, the first parable, and Ramakrishna is speaking here. When Sridoi brought a bull calf here, and I saw one day that he had tied it with a rope in the garden so that it might graze there. I asked him, Sridoi, why do you tie the calf there every day? Oracle, he said, I'm going to send the calf to our village. When it grows strong, I'll yoke it to the plow. Well, as soon as I heard those words, I was stunned to think. Oh, how inscrutable is the play of the divine Maya. Kamarpukur and Shori are so far away from Calcutta. This poor caul must go all that way. Then it will grow, and it will this poor calf must go all that way. Then it will grow, and at length it'll be yoked to the plow. This is indeed the world. This is indeed Maya. I fell unconscious. Only after a long time did I regain consciousness.
See, it is about a bull. The calf grows up to be a bull, see? So, but of course the point of the story is that Maya has a way of trapping us into this world, and we end up kind of yoked to the world and its ways, and we have to kind of go through the motions. So how do you break free of that and yet still continue to exist in the world is just like we were reading in the last book on spiritual practices, as you practice the 4 yogas. And of course, yoga is the same root as the word yoke. So we're trying to yoke ourselves to the Lord instead of getting yoked to the world. And so that's really the essence of this story, is that we're going to end up being yoked to the plow of Maya, but we're going to break free of that plow of Maya by yoking ourselves to the Lord instead. All right, so the second one is in the forest of the world. This one is a fairly familiar one, so let's go ahead and read that one.
Once a man was going through a forest when 3 robbers fell upon him and robbed him of all his possessions. And one of the robbers said, "What's the use of keeping this man alive?" So saying, he was about to kill him with his sword. The second robber interrupted him. "Oh no, what's the use of killing him? Tie him hand and foot. Leave him here." The robbers bound his hands and feet and went away. After a while, the third robber returned and said to the man, "I'm sorry, you hurt? I'll release you from your bonds." After setting the man free, the thief said, "Come with me. I'll take you to the public highway." After a long time, they reached the road. At this, the man said, "Why, sir, you've been very good to me. Come with me to my house." "Oh, no," the robber replied. "I can't go there. The police will know it." This world itself is the forest. The 3 robbers prowling here are Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. It is they that rob a man of the knowledge of truth. Tamas wants to destroy him. Rajas binds him to the world, but Sattva rescues him from the clutches of Rajas and Tamas. Under the protection of Sattva, man is rescued from anger, passion, and other evil effects of Tamas. Further, Sattva also is a robber. It cannot give man the ultimate knowledge of truth, though it does show him the road leading to the supreme abode of God. Setting him on the path, Sattva tells him, "Look yonder. There's your home." But even Sattva is far away from the knowledge of Brahman.
Yeah, so that was the parable that Sri Ramakrishna frequently used to describe the nature of the 3 gunas. And of course, there are a couple of ways of describing the 3 gunas, but basically, tamas is ignorance, or the truth veiled so that you can't see it. And so it's the worst of the 3 gunas, you could say. It's sometimes also described as dullness. So you're so dull you can't even consider doing anything. You're just kind of out of it. Or you're blinded, or you're completely ignoring the truth. Then rajas is activity of some sort. And so there's more of an energy involved. And so you've kind of escaped the worst of the first first guna, where tamas doesn't, you don't even want to get out of bed. You've got some energy now, and you can undertake a few activities, but that's still not going to free you. But sattva is that which reveals something of the nature of the reality. It's often considered in colors. Tamas is black, rajas is red, and sattva is white. Sattva is revealing of the truth, but it's still in a disguise. So you have to see through the disguise and find the reality behind the disguise. So sattvic things are said to lead you to the truth, but they're still veiled in Maya. It's still part of the veil of Maya. But you use sattva to get out of it. Similar to the idea of the two thorns. We'll probably read that one at some point too. I think we'll skip the next one and go on to the next section. Let's see. Yeah, I think we're going to read the men of the world, right? When they are annoyed.
Okay.
Okay.
Again, Ramakrishna speaking. You see, we don't take any collection during the performance at our place. Judah's mother says to me, well, their sadhus always ask for money. But you do not. Worldly people feel annoyed if they have to spend money. A theatrical production was being given at a certain place. A man felt a great desire to take a seat and see it. He peeped in, saw that a collection was being taken from the audience. Quietly, he slipped away. Another performance was being given at some other place, and he went there. And inquiring, found that no collection would be taken. There's a great rush of people. He elbowed his way through the crowd and reached the center of the hall. There he picked out a nice seat for himself, twirled his mustache, and sat through the performance.
Yeah, so we always try to minimize asking for money because of this parable. This was Sri Ramakrishna's ideal, and compared to many religious organizations that require tithing, where you have to give a certain percentage of your income and that sort of thing, where there are constant campaigns, we try to minimize all of that as much as possible to keep to the spirit of this parable. All right, let's look at the next one.
This is entitled When All Teeth Fell.
Fell.
Well, okay, thank you. Let me tell you a story. Man used to celebrate the Durga Puja at his house with great pomp. Goats were sacrificed from sunrise to sunset. But after a few years, well, the sacrifice was not so imposing. Then someone said to him, well, how is it, sir, that the sacrifice at your place, well, it's become such a tame affair? Well, don't you see, he said, my teeth are gone now.
So, in other words, the idea here is that a lot of times our pomp and circumstance of various celebrations has to do with what we're going to enjoy afterwards. And so we're preparing great meals for the puja so that we can enjoy them at the end. But this person, once his teeth all fell out, he couldn't enjoy a lot of the foods he could enjoy before, and so he wasn't offering them anymore. So again, you have to try to avoid that. You have to remember what you're preparing things for. You're preparing things in the puja in order to offer them to the deity, not to yourself afterwards. So let's see. All right, you want to read the next one?
This is entitled, There Are Such Men Indeed. It is not mentioned in their science that God can take human form. So how can they believe it? There are such men indeed. Now listen to a story. A man said to his friend, I've just seen a house fall down with a terrific crash. Now the friend to whom he told this had received an English education. So he said, well, just a minute. Let me look it up in the newspaper. And he read the paper. Could not find the news of a house falling down with a crash. Therefore, he said to his friend, well, I'm sorry. The I don't believe you. It's not in the paper, so it's all false.
So now, if you've ever had a news article about something that you've been in, you find that they're not always 100% accurate. But for the most part, news is fairly accurate. But some people have this attitude where if they haven't read it, it's not true. So that's kind of a silly attitude to take. If you've got a first-hand witness that's going to tell you something, seems like you ought to listen to it. Just what's published in a newspaper couldn't possibly include everything that's going on. And so, but of course, the essence of the story, it has to do with believing in God. And of course, we have many scriptures that tell you that to believe in God. So if people haven't read those, then they may not take that attitude. And scientists tend to not read those things. They tend to stick to their scientists. But many years ago, we had a gentleman named John Dobson who would lead people through a fairly lengthy course, you could say, called Astronomy for Children Under 80. And he would explain how the world is made up of hydrogen and helium falling together to form stars, and the stars clump together to form galaxies, and then the stars explode and they form all the other elements, and then he says pretty soon you've got school kids chewing gum, so he would put it. And then he would talk about Einstein's equations and how Einstein put space and time together in his relativity theory, and that the separation between you and everything you see is zero. And then he put matter and energy together in E equals mc squared. And so the question was, what's behind matter and energy and space and time? What's that one thing that's behind those four things that used to be thought of as individual things? And he said, well, if it's not in space and time, then it has to be infinite and undivided and unchanging. And he says that seems like a long way from nothing, referring to the way some Buddhist philosophies will put it, that there's a nothingness there, but infinite, undivided, and unchanging seems like a long way from nothing. And so then he would start from that and say, well, how do you get the world out of the infinite, undivided, and unchanging? And he said, well, it's by making a mistake. If you don't see it as infinite, undivided, and unchanging, then you see it as finite, divided, and changing. And then you get gravity, and electricity, and then you get the five different forms of energy in the world, and so forth and so on. So that's a very short summary of about a 10-week course, but it was very interesting how he would lead people into this, through this very scientific discussion, to the idea that there has to be a oneness behind this universe. All right, let's skip the next one, I think, and we'll go on to the plunderers who go about as religious.
There was a goldsmith who kept a jewelry shop. He looked like a great devotee, a true Vaishnava, with beads around his neck and a rosary in his hand and the holy marks on his forehead. So naturally, people trusted him, came to his shop on business. They thought that being such a pious man, he would never cheat them. Whenever a party of customers entered the shop, they would hear one of the craftsmen say, "Cassava, cassava." Another would say after a while, "Go ball, go ball." Then a third would say, "Oh, hurry, hurry." Finally, someone would say, "Hara, hara." Now, these are, as you know, different names of God. And hearing so much chanting of God's names, the customers naturally thought, why, this goldsmith, he must be a very superior person. But can you guess the goldsmith's true intention? The man who said cassava, cassava, well, he was asking.
I think it's Keshava, sorry.
He was asking, who are these? Who are these customers? The man who said Gopal, Gopal conveyed the idea that the customers were merely a herd of cows. And that was the estimate he formed of them after the exchange of a few words. But the man who said Hari, Hari, what he was asking, since they're no better than a herd of cows, then maybe rob them? But he who said Hara, Hara gave his assent, meaning by these words, do rob by all means. They're mere cows.
Yeah, so you occasionally run into people like that, and you think that religion is all about how many ornaments and decorations you can wear on your body, how many different kinds. You can only use one mala, but you see people decked out with malas all over the place, several on their neck and a few on their wrist, and all sorts of dots on their foreheads, and maybe ohms and this, that, and the other thing. Maybe several rings with ohms and so forth, or inscriptions on them. And now, some of these can act as reminders to the person, but really, how many do you need? So he's just warning us that we don't need to make a big show of religion. Reminders are great, but we don't need to brag about it. And you have to be a little cautious about people who are bragging about it. So that's, I think, the essence of that particular parable. All right, let's read the next one, How They Quarrel.
It's not good to say that what we ourselves think of God is the only truth, and what others think is false. That's because we think of God as formless. Therefore, he is formless and cannot have any form. That's because we think of God as having form. Therefore, he has form. He cannot be formless. Can a man really fathom God's nature? This kind of friction exists between the Vaishnava and the Shaktas. Now, the Vaishnava says, my Keshava is the only savior. Whereas the Shakta insists, well, my Bhagavati is the only savior. Once I took Vaishvanacharan to Mathur Babu. Mathur welcomed him with great courtesy and fed him from silver plates. The Vaishnavacharan was a very learned Vaishnava and an orthodox devotee of his sect. Mathur, on the other hand, was a devotee of the Divine Mother. They were engaged in a friendly discussion when suddenly Vaishnavacharan said, Keshava is the only savior. No sooner did Mathur hear this, his face became red with anger, and he said, you rascal. He was a Shakta. Wasn't it natural for him to say like that? I gave Vaishnavacharan a nudge.
Of course, there are several parables that we may find in here, too, of that nature. We've got the blind folks and the elephant, and you've got the chameleon. Those are two of the ones where people argue about a particular animal because they've either experienced a certain part, like the blind folks only experienced one part that they touched, or the chameleon that changes color. And so they argued about what color it was. And so this is the difficulty. God is infinite, and so it has infinite expressions, and those expressions can differ. And so if people are only familiar with one expression, then they're going to be arguing with each other. Going back to the newspaper, you can read newspapers that have different slants on the news. And so if you only read the news from one newspaper, you're only going to get one slant on the news. If somebody else only reads another newspaper, they will probably argue about the nature of the news because they will have heard the news with a slant from a completely different direction that perhaps is diametrically opposed to the other one. So this is the other danger. Now, of course, as we've mentioned before, Sri Ramakrishna constantly reminded us that Brahman and Shakti are one. And we mentioned how virtually everything that you can say about the nature of Brahman or the nature of the reality from a masculine perspective, you can also say from the feminine perspective. And it's just looking at it from two different directions. And since they're both one, and really it's genderless, it doesn't really matter which one you take. It's our mental slant that tends to put things in terms of one gender or another. And it's difficult for us to think of an it as the divine. And so we tend to think of it as some sort of a masculine entity or a feminine energy. But in reality, it's beyond gender. And it doesn't matter which gender you put on it, it's the same. And you can say the same things about it. And so you can worship it in a male form and you can worship it in a female form. It doesn't really matter. All right. I think we've got time for at least one or two more. Let's continue.
The worldling is a poor exponent of the Shastras. A man wanted to engage a Bhagavata pundit who could explain the Bhagavata to him. His friend said, "Oh, I know of an excellent pundit. There's one difficulty. He does a great deal of farming. He has 4 plows and 8 bullocks, and he's always busy with them. He has no leisure." Then the man said, "Oh, I don't care for a pundit who has no leisure. I'm not looking for a Bhagavata scholar burdened with plows and bullocks. I want a pundit who can really expound the sacred book to me."
Well, of course, usually somebody with experience is probably better able to tell you how to live in the world when you're trying to understand how to become spiritual and still live in the world. And so somebody who is still farming is probably even better at explaining the nature of the scriptures than someone who has never had to work in that way. How can they relate to people that do need to work in the world? And so I think that it's probably the essence here. If somebody's completely just immersed in the scriptures, well, that's wonderful. It doesn't give them a lot of practical experience to understand how the rest of the world can use the scriptures in order to become more spiritual. Okay, let's continue. We can read about the pumpkin cutter.
Elder the pumpkin cutter. You must have seen the sort of elderly man who lives in a family and he's always ready day and night to entertain the children. He sits in the parlor and smokes the hubble bubble. Nothing in particular to do, he leads a lazy life. Now and again he goes to the inner court and cuts a pumpkin. For since women do not cut pumpkins, they send the children to ask him to come and do it. This is the extent of his usefulness, hence his nickname, Elder the Pumpkin Cutter. He's neither a man of the world nor a devotee of God, and that is not good.
So it's a peculiar, I'm not familiar with this custom that women can't cut pumpkins, but that's an interesting side note here. But we want to, most of us have to be people in the world, and we also want to be able to be devotees of God. So we certainly don't want to be like this person who is neither a man of the world nor a devotee of God. We want to somehow become a devotee of God while we're in the world. All right. These are all very short, so we can read another one.
There's need for everything. Wicked people are needed too. One time the tenants of an estate, they became unruly. The landlord had to send Golok Chuduri, who was a ruffian. He was such a hard administrator that the tenants trembled at the very mention of his name. There's need for everything. Once Sita said to her husband, "Rama, it would be grand if every house in New Georgia were a mansion. Well, I find many houses are old and dilapidated." "Oh, but my dear," said Rama, "if all the houses were beautiful ones, well, what would the masons do?" God has created all kinds of things. He's created good trees and poisonous plants and weeds as well. Among the animals, they're good and bad, and all kinds of creatures: tigers, lions, snakes, and so on.
Sounds like the Wizard of Oz. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Anyway, so yes, it's often, again, likened to a drama. If you write a synopsis for a possible novel or an opera or something, and there's no antagonist, it's not a very interesting story. If everything is right from the start, there's nothing to unravel. If there's nothing for a hero to conquer, then there's not much of a story. So if there hadn't been a Ravana, there wouldn't have been much to tell about Rama and Sita. So there seems to be a need for a bit of the negative things in the world for us to fight against, you could say, in order to make an interesting drama. After all, this is the Divine Mother's drama, and so she is a good dramatist, and she writes good stories. And so there's all sorts of interesting things that go on in this drama. And if a lot of times we turn to God more in our times of trouble than we do in our times of good. If we could remember to be thankful to God for all our good times, we might have an easier life. But we tend to forget God when everything's going well, and only in times of great calamity or disasters do we start earnestly praying to God. So frequently, this is the reason why we have these negative things in our lives. All right, let's see. Well, we can try. Let's go ahead and read the next one. I think that should be it then.
There are men and men. Men may be divided into 4 classes: those bound by the fetters of the world, the seekers after liberation, the liberated, and the ever-free. Among the ever-free, we may count sages like Narada. They live in the world for the good of others, to teach men spiritual truths. Those in bondage are sunk in worldliness and are forgetful of God. The seekers after liberation want to free themselves from attachment to the world. And some of them succeed, others do not. The liberated souls, such as the sadhus and mahatmas, are not entangled in the world, in women and gold. Their minds are free from worldliness. Besides, they always meditate on the lotus feet of God. Now, suppose a net has been cast into a lake to catch fish. Some fish are so clever, they're never caught in that net. Now, they're like the ever-free. Most of the fish are entangled in the net. Oh, some of them try to free themselves from it, and they are like those who seek liberation. But not all the fish that struggle succeed. A very few do jump out of the net and making a big splash in the water. Then the fishermen shout, "Oh, look, there goes a big one." But most of the fish caught in the net cannot escape, nor do they make any effort to get out. On the contrary, they burrow into the mud with the net in their mouths and lie there quietly thinking, Oh, we need not fear anymore. We're quite safe here. But the poor things do not know that the fishermen will drag them out with a net. And these are like the men bound in the world.
Yeah, well, that doesn't need much explanation. That's pretty clear that many people in the world don't even realize that there is a problem, and so they're not really interested in religion. They just think this is all there is, and they're just going to try to make the most of it. But the people that do seek out religion are the ones that are seeking liberation, and those that strive hard will eventually achieve the goal. We don't run into too many ever-free souls, so we won't bother to talk about that. All right, well, we can continue with some more parables of Sri Ramakrishna in our next session next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.